Hi, everyone. We'll be getting started here shortly. Yeah, if everyone could find a seat and all that. Welcome to your last session on day 2 of this summit. I know we're all excited. Hopefully I'll see you at the pool later. Are we good? Awesome. Well, welcome to our workshop here today where we'll talk about meeting the moment. What's next for advancing LGBTQ plus inclusion in the workplace? I am Rashawn Shawnee Hawkins. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director of the Workplace Equality Program at HRC. Woo! If you don't know about us, HRC is a human rights campaign. We're one of the largest LGBTQ plus civil rights organizations in the country, one of the largest globally. We've been around for just over 40 years. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. And what we kind of really do there is try to pass pro-equality legislation that benefits our community. We lobby on Capitol Hill to get public policy passed and federal protections passed that include our community. And then we do a lot of public education, outreach, and research on our foundation side, and that is where my program lives. We have 5 top priorities at HRC. We want to defend our progress and block any new barriers to our access or any new threats. We want to elect pro-equality candidates. We want to protect the most vulnerable in our community, further legal protections, and advance equality in our workplaces, our schools, and our communities. In the foundation, we have 11 programs that really go through the day-to-day lives of LGBTQ plus folks. And what we really try to do there with our programs and our initiatives is work with individuals and organizations, folks like you in your workplaces, to really give you the tools to advance inclusion in the spaces that you are. And we do that by shedding light on injustice, partnering with institutions through our work like the Corporate Equality Index, and partnering with other nonprofits that are like-minded in coalition. So today, I'm going to give you a review of the CEI, just the history of what the Corporate Equality Index has done for our workplaces. We'll talk about the theory of change and what we try to accomplish through the CEI. If you aren't in the know, we are in the middle of a criteria evolution. We just celebrated our 20th year of the Corporate Equality Index in January. So it's time for us to make some changes and move that guidepost a little bit further. So I'll be going over that with you all. We'll give you a timeline of what the new submission cycle looks like for the CEI. And then my colleague, Annie, will be talking with you all about what best places to work really means for LGBTQ plus folks. If we have time, we'll get some Q&A in there as well. So with the Workplace Equality Program, we really have 3 pillars of resources that we put out there. We do our Corporate Equality Index every year, but we also do climate research. About every 5 years, we put a survey out into the field that really gets what it feels like to be an LGBTQ plus person in the workforce, whether you're out or not. We use a lot of the data with these resources to have business cases for inclusion and advance a lot of the initiatives that we put in the Corporate Equality Index. And then we also put out resources for DEI, HR practitioners to really give them guidance and tools on best way to serve our community. So with the 20 years of impact, we're really excited about the gains that we've been able to accomplish as a program and an organization. We know that employers must take a concrete effort in policies and best practices if they want to create intentional, inclusive workplaces. And so we have 4 pillars that we build our CEI off of. That's non-discrimination policies across all business entities. So not only how we treat each other within our workplaces, but do the partners that we work with also have those same values? What does our vendor agreements look like? Our supplier diversity? Are we putting our mouth where our money is, essentially, when it comes to being equitable and inclusive? Equitable benefits for LGBTQ plus workers and their families. So what does that look like with your full hard benefits, as we would call it, your medical benefits, but also soft benefits? What does that look like? Employee discount programs, EAPs, anything that you would offer, which we all probably know in a workplace, in a cisgender heteronormative space. Are we also offering those and have parity for community members? Do we have supporting inclusive cultures? So what does your training look like? What other best practices do you have? Corporate social responsibility. So with the CEI and the 20 years that we've had that, the value of having a corporate equality index is that there's a valuable playbook out there for employers who really don't know, in a lot of cases, what it means to create an inclusive environment, an affirming and safe environment for LGBTQ plus workers. The program has been around for 20 years. We've done the CEI for 20 years. Every week, almost every day, I have a new leader, a new employer that is asking questions and seeking out guidance from our team on how to make an inclusive environment. So we'd like to thank the CEI participants. Many of you are in here. I see Deloitte in here and Bank of America in here. You all have been CEI participants for a very long time, and are one of those best places to work distincting organizations. So we're very grateful for the companies who participate here and really take pride in being one of the top scorers on the CEI. With the history of the CEI, the first one that we had, we weren't even called the Workplace Equality Program yet. We were called WorkNet. And it was a booklet with a survey in it that maybe had 20 questions, and it came out in 2002. It only had 319 active participants. And in the very first year of the Corporate Equality Index, we only had 13 companies that could score 100. So we fast forward to this year where we're celebrating our 20th version of that. Not only have we had a record-breaking amount of participation, we've had over 1,400 employers from Fortune 1000, American Law 200, actively participate in our survey this year. And of those, 842 were earning the distinction of top scores, of 100% scores of the Corporate Equality Index. And so through the years, you can kind of see where our theory of change and our history of the CEI has helped us really advance and move inclusion and equality within workplaces. From the very first time that we put the CEI out, there was no or very little engagement with having non-discrimination policies that protected your gender identity and your sexual orientation. So fast forward to 2022, and we have over 97% of active participants have this built into their non-discrimination policy. Now we know all of this is before Bostock. Bostock's Supreme Court ruling was the summer of 2020, and that expanded Title VII to include the definition of sex, to interpret and include SOGI. But it wasn't signed into executive order until the Biden administration, and companies are still adjusting and putting this policy into place. So through the CEI and through a lot of our resources, we've been able to put a standard out there for employers to beat this before we had a federal protection to save our sense of self. When it comes to adopting more inclusive practices for gender transition guidelines, since we started tracking that in 2008, only 90 active participating companies had inclusive care for people transitioning at work. And you can see now in the year of 2022, we have over 662 companies that have inclusive healthcare. So we know that when we put a benchmark and a guide out there, companies will follow. When we think of measuring, if you see the very small box down there at the bottom, that is the representation of the companies that had transgender inclusive healthcare benefits in the year 2009 when we first started tracking it. And since then, we've been able to multiply that 22 times. 67% of Fortune 500 companies and 86% of all CEI-rated businesses offer transgender inclusive healthcare, and this year we welcomed new 108 employers to offer this type of affirming coverage. When we're measuring overall impact of the CEI with SOGI protections, we're able to, through our CEI and our work, be able to have protections for over 20 million US employees, over 16 million employees globally, and transgender inclusive benefits for over 18 million US workers and their families. something that we are very proud to be a part of. So with all of that, you've seen the progress and the growth, and although we are very excited about the over 840 companies that earned a 100 this year, we know that it's time to move that post again. So what we have, and from hearing from the community, hearing from ERG leaders, folks like you, other corporate stakeholders, is it's really time to stretch that, being that we've met about critical mass of companies who can get there. And so we've focused for our 2023 survey on these 5 areas to update the impact of our criteria. So we really want to drive equality with family formation. We've asked questions about family formation in the CEI in the past, but it's never been scored. So in 2023, that will be a part of your score if you are going to actively participate in the CEI. Raising standards for transgender inclusive healthcare by expanding the mandatory service and treatment options. Those that are in the know that WPATH just released a new version of standards of care a few weeks ago. And so marrying that with a lot of employers out here that I know that I've talked to and worked with over the most recent years who've really come to us and say, you know, we're doing what's on the CEI, but we know that there's more. So tell us how to do more. And so we really heard that and decided to expand what that looks like. So that is part of the evolution as well. We also will have best practices for utilizing intersectionality and how you examine that in your workplace along with the LGBTQ+ community. If you follow our look forward, we've broken down a lot of these new criteria changes. This particular one, when it comes to intersectionality, it's just that all of us have multiple identities that we carry. And so when you're thinking of ways to engage your employee bases, ways to educate and communicate, think of who you can partner with. What other ERG outside of your Pride ERG can you do a collaborative event with? Could you do it with your BIPOC ERG or your women identified staff, your veteran staff? All of those would be intersectional opportunities. Mandatory gender transition guidelines and workplace policies to promote and ensure gender inclusivity. So it's great to have the healthcare, but if I don't know how to use it, I don't know where to go, or I have to out myself in order to find out exactly what benefits are applicable to me, then it's really not that great. It's really not that accessible. So we put in the CEI that you should find ways to make it more convenient for employers and employees to be able to access the care that they need. And then a comprehensive guide that should be available with all healthcare resources and services to ensure ease of accessibility. And I'll get into these a little bit more. So the ones that I'll really focus on today are the bigger changes, which is really around our healthcare and family formation. So for those that are familiar with what our scoring system looks like, an overview of our family benefits is that a spousal benefit is no longer scored. We used to give a pretty significant points for having same-sex, different-sex parity when it came to benefits. But marriage equality is still the law of the land, therefore you have to have benefits for same-sex couples. So we removed points from that section in order to expand others. So with family formation, again, those will now be scored. And so the section is still worth 20 points, and you can see how those points will be shared across the 2 categories. With the standard care benefits expanding, we've always had puberty blockers being a part of what should be in there. Now it's going to be mandatory that you have puberty blockers available for dependent family members. A reminder that breast augmentation should be a part of standard surgical benefit. It is not in addition to or a cosmetic procedure. It should be part of your standard care for gender affirming care. Additional essential services and procedures are now scored. Examples of those are hair removal necessary for reconstructive care, other hair removal, voice therapy, voice surgery, tracheal shave, even travel and lodging. We have tons of resources out here. I've got my great colleague Carly in the front row with some palm cards that have a QR code for a lot of what I'm sharing. So if you're not capturing it here, you'll be able to get it and a digital copy. Our new criteria when it comes to gender inclusion and best practices, gender transition guidelines are now required. And what we mean by that is that it is a toolkit not only for the individual, but for the team. Do you have a guide for leaders? What do you do when one of your team members is transitioning? How do you handle that? What are best practices and guidances for you when they return to work? As an HR DEI practitioner, what policies and practices do you have in place that'll make that person feel safe and affirmed throughout their process and once they return? You also have to add another inclusive best practice in addition to having a guideline, something that we've never put in the CEI, but I know a lot of workplaces are starting to do, is creating ways for people to self-ID and feel safely affirmed at work. So looking at inclusive restroom policies, looking at your dress code, is it gender neutral? As someone who is mask presenting, there's been a lot of spaces that I've been in corporate dress codes where I am out of dress code because I'm not in a blouse or a skirt. So think about that. What dress codes do you have that may be rooted in binary that is going to not make a person feel safe or affirmed once they show up day one in orientation? Thinking about any other policies or practices you have for pronoun sharing, whether that's in your self-ID within your HRIS system or the information that houses all your personal information, whether it's a best practice that you have a signature block, if it's on your business cards, your name tags. Think of all the ways that you can display and show people's pronouns and preferred names and make sure that that is inclusive for all folks. When we think of the benefits guide, it's a general overview of benefits. As someone who is on the back end of the CEI submission, how many people in attendance are familiar or submitters of their CEI? Okay, great. So you know it takes like a whole community to get that CEI submitted. And it takes a small community of us back at HRC that goes through each one of those submissions to validate and make sure that we're checking receipts and what you say that you're doing, you're actually doing. But we also know that a summary plan description when we sign up for open enrollment is like several hundred pages long, and no one wants to read through that, right? We hire folks on the benefits team to tell us what that big thing says, right? So what we want is an easier way for some employers out here. I know that you have amazing, robust benefits teams. You have dedicated concierge services that help folks to find what benefits that they need for whatever life stage moment that they're having. And that's wonderful. But we also know that the CEI needs to be equitable, and not everyone as an employer has resources to do those things. So a good way to support that or supplement that is to create a benefit guide that specifically speaks to our community. So you talk about all the benefits that you have. What family formation benefits do you have? Soft benefits? What HIV, AIDS access information and things that you have? Putting all those, compiling it into a resource or a web page that is very easy for me to navigate as a new employee within your community and within your company. So that's what we're looking for there. It should also include contact information, information on appeals, wherever applicable. So we are here to help. Here is the QR code that we have here, and my colleague Carly has some with her. If you can scan that, then you'll get the toolkit for the complete 2023 CEI evolution. If you are not a subscribed member of our Look Forward webinar, we've been hosting bi-monthly meetings since the beginning of the year, really unpacking all of the criteria evolution for the CEI. So if you register for that now, you can archive and see all of those deep dive videos that can walk you through each one of those steps. You can gain access to all of that. We also have adjusted the submission timeline. Most folks are used to submitting their survey over the summer, this past summer. But since we've done all this criteria evolution, we just wanted to make sure that we gave employers enough time to get there. So what we are going to do is release the CEI at the end of 2023 instead of January. So November is where you're going to see that report come out, right around the holiday time. And the survey will open in the spring of 2023. It will still be open for 3 months as usual. For those that know, if you're returning participants of that, you'll get a unique link from our team to be able to submit your survey. For those that aren't actively participating and would like to, email us at cei@hrc.org, and my team will get you all the information to make sure that your company is eligible to participate. Other resources that we have, I and my team have designed what a benefit guide looks like and provided several templates for you all. So if you don't have it, you can just plug into what we've created. And we've also made a special FAQ guide for inclusive benefits holistically. So with that, I will transition to my colleague, Annie Fett-Cruz. I'll give you the clicker here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Big shout out to Shawnee. I mean, the team Shawnee manages is incredible and is such a resource for all of you. So Carly here, Marcos Garcia, Courtney Sanford, Linda Ochoa, the whole team's pretty amazing. So, yeah. All right, so I'm gonna shift it up a little bit because we wanna talk about not just the evolution of the CEI itself, but the evolution of how we at HRC are thinking about what it means to be a best place to work from a corporate perspective. So I am Annie Fett-Cruz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Stakeholder Engagement at HRC, and I manage all of our stakeholder public policy work. So in your world, that means things like the Business Coalition for the Equality Act. Those of you who are signed on to our national statement on anti-LGBTQ state legislation, thank you. That's the work that I manage. So I want to spend a moment just talking about what we are seeing right now. So this is going to get a little stark. I know we've talked about it a little bit even in our previous session. But our opposition is really trying to roll back our progress, right? We know that it's not just the last 40 years, but the last 400 years. So they've overturned Roe v. Wade. We know we're just one Supreme Court decision away from potentially having that affect marriage equality. The attacks we're seeing on the LGBTQ civil rights is a coordinated assault on all of our most basic rights, right? So they're attacking voting rights and the integrity of our democracy. They're attacking access to care and the ability of folks to make decisions about their own bodies, their families, their futures. They're attacking freedom of information through bans on books and curriculum censorship. And we expect to see even more of this in the coming state legislative sessions in the months to come. And there is a small but vocal and very well-funded group of, frankly, extremists who are promulgating this shift to the right. And very real harm is being done right now. So we have things like white nationalism, white nationalists who have been targeting pride events. Some of you may have read in the news, there was a threat made to an event not far from here that HRC was holding just a few days ago. Proud Boys crashed a drag queen story hour at a local library in California to shout homophobic and transphobic slurs. Children's hospitals in Boston and Washington, D.C. have had bomb threats, and doctors serving trans youth have faced increasing attacks on their threats to them. And so, again, this is what we're facing right now. This is the moment. When we talk about meeting the moment, this is the moment. But I want to talk about state legislation in particular. So we've heard it in the session earlier. This has been escalating quite rapidly over the last few years. So we are on year 3 of hitting a record in terms of the number of anti-LGBTQ state bills that have been introduced. HRC is tracking over 600 bills right now that affect the LGBTQ community, but 345 at this point are anti-LGBTQ. This looks like things like healthcare bans, sports bans, access to care, bathroom bills, and we're seeing a resurgence of RFRA bills, as was mentioned in the session before. And these are all targeting transgender and non-binary youth in particular. So 145 of those 340 bills are specifically targeting transgender youth. States have passed laws making gender-affirming care for trans kids illegal. Just last month, Oklahoma passed a bill that was holding hospitals' COVID funding hostage unless it refused to provide gender-affirming care. We know Governor Abbott in Texas is not only trying to make that care illegal, he's trying to prosecute parents and doctors for child abuse. And of course, not to be outdone, Governor DeSantis in Florida is also going after the healthcare rights of transgender people in the state. And so some families in these states are being forced to pick up and leave. And we hear from families like this often at HRC and are actually at times helping them do so. We know you're hearing from your own employees who are impacted as well. But there's some good news. We don't have to do this alone. First of all, as been mentioned, the numbers are on our side. I'm a data geek, so I'm going to throw up a bunch of data here in the next couple of slides. We'll see if we can get you all access to a PDF version so you can take a look later as well. But the majority of Americans support LGBTQ equality. And when I say the majority, I mean across party lines, folks across regions, across faith backgrounds, and a large majority of Americans support marriage equality. And in every state, they're supporting protecting trans people from discrimination, majorities. And so our power is magnified when we act together. And I want to specifically talk about the business case here, which is that the workforce is getting queer and will continue to do so. And you heard that from the kids, right? The kids from Gender Cool earlier, that is who we're all going to be working with and working for, frankly, very soon, if not now. And so, if you look at, you can just scroll up, I'll cite some of these stats. It's hard to see on the screen. Down, scroll down. Thanks. So, because I don't have that good of sight, today, while less than 3% of baby boomers and just a little more than 4% of Gen Z identify as LGBTQ, we have 10% of millennials identifying as LGBTQ+, and 20% of Gen Z as LGBTQ. And by 2030, more than 40% of the workforce will be Gen Z and millennial. Take this back. Share it with your colleagues. So, meeting the moment. Let's talk about what we know is the reality for you all as employers, as companies. There's a lot of pressure. And it's increasing, and it's going to continue to increase. And I'm going to cite some data, but we know this is the case. And our own advocacy at the Human Rights Campaign has to meet this moment too. And so we're trying to figure out how we can all walk forward together in this space. So I want to paint a picture, because again, it's real. And it's not just from a public policy lens. It's not just pat giving. Obviously, there are concerns about rainbow washing and marketing campaigns. And it's important to note, again, if you can look here, that it's the LGBTQ community who's concerned at higher rates than others, and the growing population of millennial and Gen Z workforce as well. And employees are the loudest voice. All of you, more so than senior management when it comes to how companies are considering making and taking stances on social issues. And again, we know the pressure is not going to be going away. This was a 2021 survey of government affairs executives and companies who are saying that they expect to see this trend continue over the next 2 years. This was 3 years before. But again, let's be honest. Okay, we know that there's increasing risks, and that this is an issue of, a lot of people are coming to your senior C-suite folks and asking them for things, right? It's not just our community, it's everything that's happening around the country. And so, again, as we heard in the presentation over lunch, we know responding to this pressure requires courage, and for companies to not stand on an island alone by themselves, because targets are created that way. So again, we know that companies are doing a lot. So thank you. Much of that is happening because of all of the work that you're doing through your ERGs, or frankly, the fact you're knocking on your SVP or managing directors or CEOs' doors. And we know that a lot of behind-the-scenes lobbying is happening by companies. And I just want to give a shout out to some of the work that your GR folks are doing behind the scenes that frankly, a lot of the times they can't talk about publicly. But we know it's happening. I can tell you for a fact that there were bills in Utah, in Ohio, and other places where companies, trade associations, chambers of commerce told lawmakers to cut it out. And bills got stopped, stalled, or not introduced to begin with. So coalition work, association lobbying, state lobbying, setting new PAC guidelines, public statements, amicus briefs that your folks are signing on to. You are doing a lot, but there's room for more. So, in that spirit, in June, we announced that we would be separating the Best Places to Work distinction from the Corporate Equality Index. And we shared a plan to create a new distinction above and beyond the CEI 100 score that would recognize companies' commitments to pro-LGBTQ+ policy advocacy and products and services. And we've spent the time since then listening, having one-on-ones with many of you in the room. Thank you so much for your input. We've consulted our own business advisory council, and we're going to continue to be doing that work of discovery through the month of October in order to come back to you all by the end of the year with a new refined approach to this plan and what those expectations are going to be looking like and pushing out the rollout to 2024. When we originally announced it, we were thinking 2023. So just so to give you a sense of that timeline again, and we made the announcement in June. We've been doing research and discovery and candid conversations with many folks in corporations around the country. We're going to continue to be doing that through the month of October, finalizing the concept and thinking about how we're going to be operationalizing it at the end of this year, and making an announcement to you again at the end of the year. But I have an ask. I have an ask for you today. So again, I do the public policy corporate engagement for HRC, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't offer you opportunities to get engaged right now. So in particular, the Respect for Marriage Act will pass. I'll put that energy out there. We are hoping that the Congress will bring it up perhaps even as soon as the week of November 14th. We have a business sign-on letter. We launched it originally with 173 companies who joined in 4 business days when we thought the bill might be voted on the floor. So again, big shout out to the fact that folks were able to move that decision making internally in that fast of time. We're now at almost 300 companies who have joined that letter, but I'd like to see more. We heard almost 400 had joined the amicus brief for the Obergefell case. So there's still an opportunity to join if your company has not yet. Please encourage them to do so. State legislatures are coming back from their summer breaks, and so we're seeing bills get introduced and bills moving around the country. So it's really important for companies to continue to encourage their in-state lobbyists, their contract lobbyists, to make it a priority in conversations with lawmakers they have relationships with, that you have corporate values, you have positions and statements on these issues, and you'd like to see lawmakers abandon efforts that are anti-LGBTQ in nature. Again, whether it's in-state lobbyists, contract lobbyists, your chambers of commerce that you belong to in states, trade associations in states, the National Retail Federation and the state affiliates have a lot of power at the state level, for example. But there are other ways to get involved with us. Those are just 2 open right now. But I want to encourage you to do everything that you can when you can. And those are internal conversations that you're going to be having, public statements, opportunities to educate your workforce. So myself, colleagues like Sarah, who was our lunch plenary speaker, Kate Oakley, who's our state legislative director, we are often coming to ERGs and talking about this, providing a legislative legal landscape, helping employees understand the impacts to them, the business impacts of bills that are moving, and what's going on and opportunities for them to engage. And we're always happy to come and do that. So just reach out and let us know. So thank you, but we'd like to open it up. We're sure that you all have a lot of questions for us. And while we're doing that, oh, did I miss the slide? I wanted to leave the contact information up. I think I lost that slide. Well, we'll leave this one up. Thanks, everyone. Do you have a mic that passes around? Yep.
Hi, thank you both. Thank you both. Richard from Capital Group. So it's long been a source of wondering, confusion, and even candidly at times frustration. The issue of the CEI 100 score, notwithstanding the progress that's been made very recently with the new requirements. So thank you for that. But the one issue, as someone who's been in the workforce for over 30 years, is companies using the 100 score, touting that score for talent acquisition. Talent comes in the door and then notices there's no openly LGBTQ members of the C-suite, senior leadership, or board of directors. So the feeling that gives us, those of us on the ground working in corporate America, is that there's sort of a disconnect between this 100 perfect score that companies feel says we don't have anything else to do, like we're perfect, and the true lived experience of the employees who see that there is a ceiling in their company that they cannot get above. So can you help us understand why there isn't a requirement for proportional representation of LGBTQ plus in senior leadership and above, and what can we do to help influence that at HRC?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Very, very thoughtful. And what I'll say is, being a new director in this program, a lot of what you're saying and coming from the corporate space, I hear you. And a lot of why we are rebranding what CEI 100 scores are is that it feels a little misleading to give a 100% score, because it feels like there's nothing more to do when all of our tool is a benchmark. It's the floor, not the ceiling. So we want to make sure that we're branding things to be more in alignment with what it actually means to get 100% or 100 points on the CEI. So that's part of what Annie was mentioning of separating the distinction. So that is part of your question. The other part is around equitable representation through all tiers. And a lot of that has to do with data. And we aren't great as employers in tracking LGBTQ plus data properly. It's just not done. We had Brad talk about it in his space on being able to grow self-ID year over year, but still having less than 50% of a company engaged in that. It's really hard. When companies aren't doing the internal work to make people feel safe about disclosing, people aren't. And we know through our climate research of the cost of the closet, there's still a whole lot of work to be done culturally within an organization that goes beyond what the CEI actually has. The CEI is around internal policies and practices. It can't grade how you feel every day when you're in there. That's a little bit subjective and objective depending on where you're at. You can have an employer in a progressive community that a person feels super safe and affirmed every day inside the four walls of their employer and in their community. And that same employer could be in the Deep South, and there's a very different experience for folks that are in that location. And so that's hard to really kind of quantify or qualify on the CEI itself. We do have diversity metric questions. So those who are submitters know we ask, do you have LGBTQ plus diversity metrics in your overall diversity goal? If you have diversity goals and metrics for your senior leadership, do you have representation on your board? If you have board diversity requirements, those aren't publicly scored and put out in the CEI in a way that I think when you read the report, you know that. But it is in there. And it's a sort of a twofold approach to it. We put the blueprint out there, we tell community, we tell employers that this is something that should be very important. They should have representation through all of their leadership tiers. And at the same time, we're trying to give guidance on how to track that information thoughtfully so that they know. Because unless everyone self-discloses every time they interview for a promotion, a lot of employers aren't really gonna be able to know that information. And should you have to put yourself in a program that outs you in order to know that, or can that just be information that's known behind the scenes? Some employers do very intentional work and have pipelines and pathways explicitly for LGBTQ plus folks, and that's wonderful. I would love a world and every employer is doing that, along with other traditionally marginalized identities. But we know that as far as the CEI, to make it a fair and equitable playing field from some of the really big players that participate and some of the ones that are barely qualifying eligibility, that we put a benchmark that's attainable in both ends of the spectrum. I don't know if that fully satisfies your answer, but I do think that is something very important. And as we continue to be out here in this space and in the next evolution of the CEI and the next evolution of our community and society that we live in, that could very much well be something where the data is caught up enough for us to be able to make that a mandatory thing in the CEI.
So we have a question from our virtual audience. Hi, all, Rebecca York, out in equal they, them pronouns. What can entry-level employees do to help bring attention to legal and policy activism the company can do?
Feel free to jump in if you want.
Oh, no, good.
So the question was kind of entry-level employees?
What can entry-level employees do to start influencing the policy and activism that their companies are engaged in?
Join an ERG. Or if there isn't one, find a couple of folks and see how you can work with leadership in your organization to create one. And I think no one person should feel like they're doing this alone, but I know that does happen. And so any opportunities to come together and join and do the work together is going to be really critical. The other thing I want to encourage folks to do is to find organizations who are doing this work. Out in Equal, of course, we're doing this work on a daily basis. We're tracking all of these bills across all of these states. We're looking at federal policy, state policy, municipal policy. We're even starting to pay attention to things like school board efforts, which are proliferating right now around the country. So whether you're entry level or other, senior level folks here in the room today, you should not feel like you alone have to track all of that. We're doing that work for you. So you're welcome to become a member of the HRC and join our mailing lists. We share information on a regular basis. One of my previous slides, if I can go back to it. So I want to give a shout out to this webpage here where you can sign up for weekly corporate public policy briefings that I put out with my team, where we summarize what is going on around the country, bills that are moving quickly. We often have action alerts where we'll have specific asks for companies to get involved, whether it's, Bill X is moving, we need you to contact the Senate President, we need you to contact the bill sponsor, we need you to contact the governor's office. We give you contact information for how to do that. We're sharing opportunities to sign on to amicus briefs, to get involved with Hill testimony. And so it's a great way to stay connected. We also do, during peak state legislative session, bi-weekly public policy briefings. We do them on more of an ad hoc basis during the summer and fall. We just had one last week on kind of the legal landscape of gender-affirming care policy around the country and how it's impacting businesses and ways for businesses to get involved with us in the work. We're going to be doing one, I think, as soon as next week. We haven't gotten the date scheduled, but there's a lot happening on school-based public policy right now, as you can imagine. Curriculum bans are proliferating, again, at the state legislative level, but at the school board level. And so we're bringing Sarah Warbelow's team, again, your lunch speaker, on to have a conversation with you all about what's happening. And it's an opportunity in real time to ask questions of our staff and our team, whereas obviously the reports are more static.
Yeah. And I'll just say we have a web series from the Workplace Equality team called The Look Forward, and that's for any LGBTQ plus inclusion stakeholder, regardless of your title within your workplace. And you'll get all the new emerging trends of what you should be advocating for and ways to be able to advocate that for within your organization, no matter your level. Yeah, there's a few in here. I'm good to go, yeah. Yeah, go.
Hello, my name is Unique, pronouns are they, them. I have a question about ads. So I work in the advertising industry at a big ad agency, and I am a copywriter, so I sit with the art directors, and when we were talking about campaigns like commercials, videos, flyers, anything, we typically have a client expectation of what the creative should look like, especially if it's regarding queers in the creative. And then we have experts, like people who identify representation, trying to also decipher the ads, but there's not enough existing creative out there for people like me to go and look at to do it well, to do it right. And so we typically have to educate the client. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is to find authentic stories to connect the creative back to, but there just isn't enough of it right now. So do you have any advice for those of us working in advertising on how we can do it right, and how we can kind of respectfully push back on a client and tell them to be more responsible in how they're communicating on behalf of our communities?
Yeah, well, I'm no marketing expert, so I don't know if what my advice will give you will be applicable or not. I will do a call out to the Look Forward, where we did do a session around rainbow washing, and we brought in a marketing firm on how to thoughtfully market to the community. So I'll call back to that. I can connect with you after to make sure you know which one to look for. But really, I think it's all about being authentic. In any business or any brand that wants to advertise or communicate to our community, I think that they have to have a little self-check on intention. Like, what's the reason behind it, right? And if you start internally, and it's because about the community and you have internal work and your own practices on how you conduct yourself, then I think it becomes more transparent and more authentic when you show that externally. So just changing a logo to a rainbow through Pride Month isn't the appropriate and applicable way. I think narrative and authenticity in stories is a beautiful way to humanize our work in our community and to give visibility there. There's a bunch of folks in here that are beautiful people that probably feel comfortable sharing stories. Find some narratives in here, people that want to talk about their truth. I advocated for myself in corporate spaces as a human resource professional and told my truth in every moment that I was able to. And then that called me into bringing my work to HRC, where I could do it on a bigger platform instead of one workplace at a time. So there's folks out there, there's beautiful speakers we've been seeing all week here that I think you could probably tap into. Sure, why not? Yeah, I know how to drive. I have a driver's license. That'd be cute. If I do I get to keep the car? No. Yeah, no, but that's where I think. And, we have wonderful folks that we work with our youth ambassador programs. We have Elevate and Activate programs where our Trans Justice Initiative are finding community leaders that are trans and non-binary out in community and giving them an education and guidance on how to be disruptors in their community and advocate for themselves. So we have an abundance of cohorts of beautiful people within our organization, but they're everywhere. They're out here. And maybe with working with who you're partnering with, get them to look internally and see who they have within their own ranks that feel comfortable sharing stories, or even having an ERG or a BRG inform the ways that they're advertising their products. Because not only are they going to be intimately familiar with whatever they're producing and selling, they're also community members and are invested in the company. So why not tap into your employee base and your ERG as a company and get their buy-in with what you do?
The other thing I just quickly want to say about ads up here, because I didn't go through each one of these boxes, but these are each ways that the public policy engagement work makes asks of companies. And so, we'll often ask companies, will you join a sign-on letter, whether it's a state-specific one, a national letter for state or federal related public policy issues. We'll have one-on-one calls with you to provide some technical assistance or consultation, depending on things you might be dealing with internally. We've even done things like sign NDAs, where we can have really candid conversations with corporate folks. We'll set up lobby days. We'll have opportunities around the Equality Act, for example, for companies to come in and meet with lawmakers. I mentioned the ERG conversations, but ways to help empower and mobilize your employees. We have a lot of social media content that we're asking folks to tweet and retweet. We do encourage folks to be sharing public statements, and we'll often provide narrative resources for you to work from. Industry action, where we'll work at a sector level and encourage companies to come together to put a statement out from the entire sector. And then the ads. So the ads are things like, for those of you who are following, in March, after Governor Abbott issued his directive targeting the families of transgender and non-binary children, we actually worked with companies to place an ad in the Dallas Morning News on March 11th. 64 companies join in that with their logos and a full-page ad asking Governor Abbott to abandon his efforts to target these families. So again, thank you to those of you in the room who did that. That was a pretty bold ask. And we know not all companies are going to be able to get to that yes, but I'd like to see how we can continue to move companies forward in that space. And no company wants to do it alone. So the more we can get companies doing it together, I think the more we'll be able to do more things like that in the future. We have a very eager hand back there.
Yeah. Here and here. We'll get you.
Thank you so much. Laura, she, her pronouns. My question is about the separation between the best place to work and the CEI, and specifically around lobbying and spend. When we know that there are industry groups specific to your business, whatever business that may be, and that some of the politicians that might be kind of selling these anti-LGBT bills and signing on to them might also be supporting your business in other ways. I saw on one of the slides about how can you find out where your corporate PAC money is going and dividing that out. So my question is really, is that going to be a factor in who continues to receive that best place to work designation if there are funds that are going to some of these people that are not supportive of the LGBT community?
Do you want me to start, or you want to start?
Yeah, I guess I can start. I think that your question is one of the ones that we have been milling over as an organization, as a program for a while now. And what Annie shared about our interim president, Joni Madison's op-ed that was released during Pride Month is we are separating that distinction. What we've seen, especially in the most recent years, is almost using the best places to work distinction as a shield for some of the acts that employers have done to our community outside of what the CEI actually means and what that score actually means, which is one of the main reasons why we are rebranding what a CEI 100 is, and then creating an entirely separate level and tier of distinction for employers that are considering where their PAC money is going, where their products and services are impacting, and how that not only uplifts our community, but making sure that in the same way they're not doing harm to our community in those spaces. Annie, if you have anything to add with that?
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd add is, we're having conversations with companies about some best practices or promising practices that they're implementing around this space. Things like improved transparency around PAC giving. There are companies who do that extremely well. There are companies who don't do it at all. Thinking about opportunities for, lifting up some of these practices, like allowing employees to designate where their PAC contributions go. Thinking about, how we tackle the issue of heavily regulated and non-regulated companies, which, just let's all start working on Citizens United, by the way. But there's a system in place that makes this really challenging. If it was a easy thing, we would have solved it already. But it's important for us to be having conversations, to be lifting up some of these best practices, and I think that's something you'll see more from us about in the future.
Absolutely. There's one right here.
Hi, my name is Ferris. I use she, her pronouns. I work for Raymond James Financial. Thinking about the CEI updates, so intersectionality, it's something that has not been talked about and is now all of a sudden going to be talked about. It's become a hot topic at our organization, and actually some people have had to spend hours in conversation about why we've even talked about intersectionality in one webinar that we did earlier this summer. I am in a position where I'll be advocating for the updates and policies and practices that we institute in pursuit of maybe maintaining 100 on our HRC CEI score next year. But I'm really just looking for some context in your thoughts around intersectionality so that we can just think about how to talk about that at work.
Yeah, I mean, intersectionality has been thrown around a lot in the most recent years to where it maybe has lost its meaning a little bit, right? So I call back to Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term in the first place, and just really thinking about when, as employers and as advocates, when we think of groups, especially underrepresented groups, in a monolithic way, we're really forgetting the nuances and unique experiences of folks that have compounding identities. So what Kimberly Crenshaw was talking about, specifically with a lawsuit of discrimination for Black female workers, is that these Black women couldn't argue discrimination because of their gender, because white women, right, were still being promoted, and they couldn't argue based on their race because Black men were still being promoted. So the unique intersection of being a woman and being Black put them at a disadvantage and an oppressed experience within that workplace. So when we're thinking about being a thoughtful employer, and we're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and I add B, belonging, what does that actually mean? How do you feel safe and affirmed in a workplace beyond just the days of feeling glad that we just had a job, right? And the future of our workforce becoming more queer, and not only identifying, but allies are also in that generation. So not only are we going to have a huge flux of identifying folks within the workforce, their colleagues and their peers within that age group really aren't standing for any employer that's not going to see that. And so when we're talking about intersectionality, we really have to be intentional about all the policies and things that we put in place to make sure that the most marginalized amongst us still feel seen and included there. So when you're speaking about it in a workplace, especially one that's unfamiliar, starting with the definition, right, of this is what it actually means, not conflating intersectionality with like an easy win. I've been in a meeting before where someone wanted to celebrate easy wins on intersectionality, and I argue, what's an easy win on intersectionality? Give me what were those examples? Putting diversity on a panel or on a board or on a team is an intersectionality. That's a diversity metric. So understanding the terms, and being able to inform your workflow by understanding those terms. And then use us. You're a CEI participant. My team gives technical assistance to all active participants. So if you need one of us to roll up in your workplace virtually, we can definitely educate folks on the importance of intersectionality and do it at all tiers. We can talk to C-suite, we can talk to middle management, we can talk to everyone. Yeah. Is it maroon shirt? Glass? Right, yep, you.
Okay, you mentioned earlier about making sure that the CEI score is good for small companies to evaluate against as well as large companies. The larger companies get, a lot of times their health insurance and other things start getting outsourced to providers just because they've grown to be in all 50 states in some cases. There are certain states that have monopolies by health insurance providers who are actively working against the trans community. Is there anything that HRC is looking at that with both the CEI scoring and best places to work, where if a company's in 50 states and they have benefits equal for everybody in 49 of the 50, but their provider in the 50th state is not cooperative, let's say?
Yeah, so a lot of bigger companies are self-insured versus fully insured, and this is like super benefit nerd vernacular right there. But the bigger you are, the more you can say. You end up using an insurance provider just as a broker. And so, I know many employers who are in this room right now are fully insured, and they decide what their package is going to be, and they create supplemental benefits to support getting comprehensive and inclusive benefits no matter where their employee bases are. This is something that we are looking at a lot. I'm looking at personally a lot as we're building up the standard of what it means to have inclusive care, specifically trans inclusive care, at the same time that our community is being attacked and those rights are trying to be removed, is a challenge. And it's a juggling act there as to what that looks like, especially when it comes to the CEI. And so we want to be very thoughtful about how that's going to be, and is it exactly the right time to be pushing. So those are things that are still under consideration as far as what the CEI 2023 full criteria will look like. You will all who participate will get a scorecard that will align you with the new criteria versus current, so that you can actually see where you'll fit, and you'll get that by the end of this year. And then I do other outreach outside of the CEI where I have an insurer task force, where I have representatives of insurance brokers, I have representatives from WPATH, and we put them together in rooms and we're like, look, this is what we need. How do you remove barriers to this care, barriers to access? Some of the smaller ones, and I'm thinking like Florida is coming to mind because Florida's healthcare, state-funded healthcare is under attack right now. And so if that becomes a thing, being able to help employers find brokers outside of a state plan to be able to supplement that. One of the main things is the same with Repro Health is being able to provide travel and lodging if the state that your employee is in is not having affirming care. Is it a part of your comprehensive package to be able to get them to a space that it is available? So those are the kind of ways we're trying to address what we're seeing coming down the pike in that space. I don't know which one was first. Way back there? And I think that'll be the last one we can take.
I'm a consultant that works with companies who are doing the CEI. I'm seeing a lot of squeamish C-suite people, specifically to the point that you were just talking about, that there are these renewed attacks. And I'm seeing, even more so than the last CEI we did, fewer and fewer political will in-house to really push things forward. They're worried that they will be attacked. Any advice for those of us who are trying to make the case and help them gird their loins, if that's the right analogy?
I mean, it's hard, right? We live in a very politically polarized climate right now where everything seems to be a political thing, whether you like mustard or ketchup, right? So when I get C-suite and senior executives being a little shy on speaking out and being a part of this, but what we say is that it's not political, it's personal. These are your employees, these are your employees' families, these are your neighbors, these are your customers. This is who you need to be advocating for. Because if you don't, our community has no problem finding somewhere else to go. We can shop somewhere else, we can work somewhere else, we can drive a different car, we can do all these other things, and we have power within our dollar as a community. So for those that are internal, when you get pushback, like LGBTQ plus stuff is political, we don't want to get into that, we're trying to stay neutral. You can't be neutral. Neutral is erasing identities in existence. And if you want me to stay here and continue to give you my skills and talents as an employee, then I gotta feel that you're invested in me and my community and my family, just like you would be anyone else. So having the confidence a little bit to say some of that kind of thing, but really bringing it into personalizing it, and this is about your employees, this is about the community. For those that may be a little bit more stubborn, hit it in the revenue model. Well, if you don't, then you're gonna lose. Gallup poll just said, right? 40% of the workforce is gonna be queer, and we have allies in that space as well. That is your future consumer market. So if you're not being inclusive to them, then they're not gonna wanna mess with you. So that helps a little bit. We look at the CEI, not everybody participates actively. That's in the Fortune 1000 and Fortune 500. And so we name names a little bit there, and that gives some pressure too. All right, anything to add? All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you so much. Let's stick around for a little bit if folks want to come up and ask questions.
Yeah.